So we're looking forward to having a Q&A soon with Bethany Florek, with Greeley and Hansen. Before we get to that, thank you for joining us if you're on Facebook. Thank you if you're watching this as a pre-recorded session. We're excited that you've joined us. And in a few minutes, we're going to kick things off. We have a minute until 11 o'clock. And then it should be a good session. Uh, Interviewing is really an interesting topic. And I think many students, when getting ready for interviews, and not only students, but alumni, established professionals, can get a little nervous. And so that's why we're offering Interview 101 today as a part of the 30-day challenge. Good morning. My name is Dale Austin. Thank you for joining us. We're really fortunate to have a guest speaker with us today, and she is Bethany Florek. She is with um, Greeley and Hansen, and in a minute, I'm going to say a few more words to introduce her, tell you a little bit about her background, and then we will segue right into really a Q&A, some common questions that probably are on your mind as you think about going into interviews. And so again, welcome. This is Interview 101. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dale Austin. And, interviewing can be a challenge. Most of us, when we go into interviews, really want to present effectively. We want to really put our best foot forward, but we also tend to be in what I call interview mode. We're tight, self-conscious, stiff. We don't want to muck up. Who does? And so what we really want to do is what I call the two key P's: preparation and practice. And with us today, I'm going to introduce soon our guest who's going to give us some insights on these and other questions as we think about interviewing. There'll also be a time to have your questions. So if you're not muted, if you could please mute. And then as we're talking, if Bethany is responding to a particular question, feel free to jump in. And then at the end, we'll also allow at least 5 minutes for additional questions that you can either unmute yourself or pop in and record in the chat box at the lower part of your screen. But preparation and practice is key to really moving from what I call interview mode, which I alluded to a minute ago, to what I call personality mode, where you can simply be yourself. You can convey your passion and interest for the work that you're interested in pursuing with this particular organization. You can articulate why that organization and talk about their mission, their products, their services. And so preparation and practicing is key also, because most of us are not used to simply talking about ourselves. It's awkward, it's difficult. And so, and it's a lot of times we don't know even how much to say. And so that becomes a real challenge for us. So practicing becomes, in my mind, and I think many experts like Bethany's mind, really important, so that when you go into the interview, you can feel comfortable, relaxed, and have a sense of confidence that you can understand how to articulate your experiences, your goals, your skills, and tie it to the role and the organization so that the employer can see the connection between all the great things you've done and what their particular needs are in this role at their organization. And so without saying any more about that, what I'd like to do is segue now to introduce our guest for today. We're really excited to have Bethany Florek with us. Bethany really started part of her career just a few years ago with Disney and had a great experience with Disney. And then for a number of years worked for Aramark, a very large corporation doing HR work, human resources work. And then for the last 10 years, and maybe a month or two extra, for the last 10 years, she's been with Greeley and Hansen, which is a major engineering firm in the Chicago area. She's director of human resources. And so, Bethany, thanks for joining us today.
Great. Thank you, Dale. I'm so happy to be with all of you and chat for the next half an hour or so.
Great. So what I'd like to do, and Bethany has graciously agreed to this, instead of having her speak or me speak for a long time, we're going to raise some common interview issues that people wonder about as you go into interviews. Like, how do you handle this type of question or this type of question? So the first question I'd like to start with is, it's not uncommon. In other words, it's pretty common for employers to ask the following question. They think it's the easiest question in the book. Most candidates feel like, what in the world am I going to say? And that question is, tell me about yourself. So how should a candidate approach that type of broad question?
Right. And you're so right, Dale. You're probably going to answer that question at every single interview that you go to, whether it's a phone screen or again as you're interviewing with more people in that organization. So if there is one answer that you want to practice and prepare for, it would be this question. And I would caution us that as we're practicing, sometimes it might feel easy to memorize, something that you've written out, and this is again the tricky thing. It's like you want me to be succinct and practice, but not sound overly rehearsed. You want to sound like yourself while you're answering that question. So you don't want to sound like a robot, going through a scripted response, but you do want to be prepared because then you can allow your personality to shine through. So when you're asked, and usually this question will be the first question, you'll sit down, you'll thank the person for having you at the interview, or you'll become having a conversation over Zoom, and they'll say, "Okay, great, Bethany. Before we dive in, I've got your resume, or I understand you're interested in this position. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?" And so, what that interviewer is asking you for is just a real short, sometimes you'll hear people call it your elevator pitch. And we call it elevator pitch because you should be able to say it in the amount of time that you're on an elevator with someone. Um, so just real quick, 1 to 2 minutes, and you're going to describe a little bit of your story. So um, that interviewer, might want to know, you could add in a personal detail of where you're from, where you went to school, what was your major or minor, what were your interests academically, because right now at the stage of the career, you are in, academic is the most recent experience that you've probably had. If you had a position on campus or did work over the summer, those would things, especially if they have skills or behaviors that are applicable or traits that could be useful to this employer for the position that you're being hired for. And there's ways to use those traits, right? So let's say you were a hostess or a waiter or waitress over the summer, but you're applying for, an engineering position. I work for an engineering company. We might not initially think that there are some crossover, skills that you learned during a summer job, but I'm sure at that summer job, you had to be on time, right? You had to be punctual. You had to have a good knowledge of your responsibilities. I'm sure you had to work as a team and you had to take direction from a supervisor. Those are all things that your next employer, your next supervisor, they would love to hear from you. So, then would talk a little bit, about anything that you're doing currently. So as you grow in your career or have a little bit of experience underneath your belt, you can talk a little bit about what you're currently doing, and then maybe save a sentence or two at the end to look forward, what your interests are, what you're passionate about. Um, Again, this is going to sound like this is walking a tightrope because we don't want to be too specific when we talk about what our future interests are, because we want to keep some things a little bit broad, a little bit more open, so that they're like, well, Bethany just said she's really passionate about this, and this really isn't what our job is. Is she really that interested in our job? So you don't want to box yourself in. So I know this sounds like it's far more complex than just answering that question, but if I were to answer it, I'd say, oh gosh, my name is Bethany Florek. I'm from mid-Michigan. Academically, I went to Hope College where I studied business administration and communication. In my career, I started with a recruitment lens at Aramark. A large hospitality food business where I learned the ins and outs of workforce development, recruitment, and training, and then grew in a role during the recession. I took on a role where I knew I'd always be challenged, learn something new, took the position not knowing completely what to expect. But 10 years later, I find myself overseeing benefits administration, employee relations, recruitment, college recruitment, strategy and those types of things. And really, in my next career or in my next position, I'm looking to use that skill set that I've developed in X position. So a little bit of a biography of yourself. You want to make sure that you're smiling while you're saying these things because they should be about you. They're personal to you. Um, I've heard, when I've practiced with students or folks that are early in their job search, sometimes where they have pitfalls that I see is they go too personal. So they maybe say their age. They might say, okay, my name's Bethany, I'm 22, and they might list hobbies. So I would keep those. Unless it was like a significant hobby, especially right out of college, maybe you played on a sports team, that's something that I would say is, significant hobby. Or maybe you were involved in Greek life and you held, an executive officer position, something like that, something where you can demonstrate responsibility, core values that might be important to that company of teamwork, respect for others, demonstrating a level of heightened responsibility. Those things, I think, especially at your point in your career right now, would be things that you could add without it sounding like, okay, like if someone asked me and I started talking, a lot about college and what I did, they would be like, Bethany, okay, yeah, well, like we understand you went to college, but we want to know about right now. So as you develop in your career, this elevator pitch, this tell me about yourself is going to develop. So we always need to kind of dust it off the shelf and continue to modernize, update. It's going to evolve with you.
Great, great ideas, great insights. Another common question that we really hope doesn't get asked, but frankly is asked quite a bit. And that question is, tell me about a weakness or tell me about your limitations, and there's a temptation to say something that is a strength and we're trying to dress it up as a weakness. And
That's right.
most recruiters can see right through that. We don't want to do that. We don't want to say a cliche like, oh, I'm a perfectionist or something like that. So how should a student approach the weakness response?
Mhm. Great question. And this is always number two after tell me a little bit about yourself. This is another area where you want to be clear and really thoughtful. This is not an answer that you want to wing or just think of off the top of your head or kind of improvise about. So good thought to this question is going to help you because most likely, again, especially at this point in your career, it's going to get asked during your interview. And it usually comes after the question about your strengths. So that's usually a compare and contrast question that the recruiter is going to ask you. They're going to say, Bethany, tell me, what's your strength? Tell me about, the areas of strength that you have and tell me about your weakness. Sometimes, and I think people are starting to not say the word weakness as much. Some people still do. Some people might classify that as an area of growth. So they might say, hey, Bethany, tell me about an area of strength and tell me about an area of improvement or growth for you. And you can always rephrase that back. So sometimes it's good when you're answering a question to start with the question first, right? So I'd say, okay, well, an area of strength for me or an area where I'm really proud about an accomplishment that I had recently was, and then answer the question. So I think you can, when you're answering the strength, you owe it and the weakness. We'll get to the weakness part, but if we start with strength, you want to have something to kind of back it up. You want to have an example. You want to have a behavior trait, and then kind of the why it's important to you, why you believe it's your strength. How have you demonstrated that this is your strength before? Otherwise, it'll sound like you're just just thinking of words that maybe sound good. So if I were to say, well, my strength is that I'm really punctual and I have good communication skills. no one would really know what that meant, right? They wouldn't know, like, does she write excellent emails? Does she, present well in front of others? How do we know that she has great, communication, or that, she's someone that doesn't procrastinate? So you always want to back that up by saying, I feel like one of the strengths that I could bring to your company or to this role, right? Because we always want to make it about the company and what's important to them, how you're going to add value to the company or in this position. So great question. Thank you for answering it. A strength of mine that I think I could really deliver for you in this company, particularly in this role, is that, my communication skills. And I've developed those communication skills because it was something that was really important to me at school. I was a minor in communication, and those were always the favorite classes that I went to. And here's where I've had the chance to demonstrate those skills. So I've had the opportunity to speak or be a part of this group, or I was asked to write, communications for the company that I'm involved in. Think of those things, and particularly without maybe a lot of career experience, think about where in either campus or the clubs that you have involvement. Maybe you were the secretary for the club that you were in, and these are just building upon my kind of fake example. So then we get to the flip side, right? They're going to ask, okay, great, Bethany's got strengths. What are those areas of weakness or areas of growth? And I like to ask for them as areas of growth because we're all works in progress. So as Dale alluded to, your recruiters that you're going to be interacting with do not expect you to be perfect. They themselves have areas of growth. We all do. We are all works in progress. So absolutely, kind of the first mistake or misstep someone could take is kind of pretending like they don't. So we do need to be genuine. We do need to be authentic. That is going to shine through. Dale is absolutely right. Your recruiter will know if you're one of those people that says that their area of weakness is that they work too hard, or that they are, perfectionists. They just don't know when to stop, and they just, set the bar higher, and it just takes a toll on them personally. They will know immediately what you're trying to do if you use that as an example. So this is somewhere, if you're going to prepare, I would dig a little deep. I would have a conversation with yourself and say, hey, where do I get feedback from either my friends or my professors or, supervisors that I have? Like, what are those areas of feedback that they would like me to either modify about my behavior or change? So maybe it's that you're, a little bit competitive, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I can be competitive sometimes, a lot of the times. But if it's channeled in the right way, you are someone that can make sure that everybody wins and that we get the outcome that we need, and we can raise the bar. So you could choose to say, hey, an area of growth for me is sometimes I can be a little bit competitive. It's usually because I place, a high standard for myself. But when I'm using it for good, it means that I'm an outstanding team player, and that I make sure everyone on the team succeeds, and that we achieve the goal that we sought out to do. And sometimes we do a little bit better than we sought out to do. But it's something that I have to rein in. I have to, be in check about. I have to be really present, about how I'm interacting with others at times. I would not be, where I've seen people kind of go off the rails is when they're just like way too honest. They don't pivot in what that area of weakness is. So there's like no pivot at all. And they say, oh, I'm someone who procrastinates a lot. It takes me a while to get started. Sometimes I do things at the last minute. Um, my supervisor kind of mentioned that it's a problem, but they don't take that moment to pivot and say, this is something that I'm aware of myself. It's something that I'm aware of, and I'm trying to improve. So here's what I do. Sometimes, when I get overwhelmed, I might procrastinate, and I know that I need to focus myself. So here's what I do. I keep a notebook with me, and I keep a list so that I can stay organized, and I give myself internal deadlines so that I'm making sure that I'm staying on track. So dig a little deep. Let's be honest with ourselves. We all have these areas of growth. You will be better off knowing what your areas are so that you can build, kind of these mechanisms around you and have self-awareness. Your future employer is going to be more concerned about you having self-awareness than what your quote unquote weakness actually is, because they will exist, and you will grow and you will learn, but that self-awareness will be key.
Great insights. Great insights. So, because of COVID, people are interviewing virtually, and soon, at least hopefully, that will change and we'll go back to in-person interviews. Could you talk a little bit about whether you see any difference preparing for a virtual interview versus an in-person interview?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say we are conducting, just as many virtual interviews that we were pre-pandemic. So this is absolutely something that employers, they're not waiting to hire individuals. If they need to hire for their company, they are. And absolutely a Zoom interview, FaceTime, Microsoft Teams, Google Meetings, all of those platforms will be useful. So a couple things, you've got some things to advantage, right? So you're not, sometimes the nerves come going to an interview because you're thinking like, how long will it take me to get there? What is parking going to be like? When I get into the meeting, who am I looking for? Who do I need to talk to? I'm going to sit in this room by myself, for 10 minutes before someone comes in. What do I do? Shaking hands, sitting down at the table. You've got some of those butterflies that can you don't have to worry about. Those have been replaced though with electronic technologic butterflies of like, Zoom's not working, the little box hasn't come up yet. Do I have the right link? Oh my gosh, all of a sudden where's my power cord and I'm running out of battery, like all these things happen. So I would suggest making a little bit of a checklist for yourself of what things do I need to make sure. Am I sitting in, and all these things actually matter. I know they sound like so little, but am I sitting in a good place? Am I getting some natural light? Can the interviewer see my eyes? Are they going to be able to connect with me while I'm talking? Because all of those same nonverbal communication skills about making eye contact, nodding, showing the person that you're tracking with them still matters. So you want to set yourself up and not leave, some of these last minute things to luck or by chance. So sometimes I would practice if it's a new platform that you're going to be speaking on. Maybe you get a link and you're really used to using Zoom, but it's something else. I would practice ahead of time to make sure that what if you're using your phone or your laptop that's going to be working with you. I'd make sure still appropriate dress is still really important. Neatness and professionalism from an appearance perspective is still expected of you. And I would make sure that you go somewhere, private, so that you're not going to a coffee shop or somewhere where there's going to be a lot of background noise, because that can get picked up and be incredibly distracting. Um, I think we've all learned to have a lot more grace for each other though when those things happen, right? So we've all been on calls, in the workplace where the mailman's coming and the person you're talking to and their dog is barking, or there's a child, a baby, there's people walking around, a family member in the background, you know, um, we've all kind of adopted to those regularities of interviewing from home or having meetings from home. So if something does happen, don't sweat it. It's not that you had to have the perfect experience if something unexpected does happen, but to Dale's point, as you're preparing, do everything that you have control of to prepare ahead of time so that I've got a good location, I know what I'm going to wear. But the other thing I'd bring up is you have a little bit of an advantage because you've got a desk and a laptop in front of you. So and a screen that can be behind your Zoom screen. So I would have notes. I would have notes either in front of you, kind of on your table, or as a Word document, kind of to the side on your screen. So, you can minimize your screen so it doesn't take up the full screen, and then have a notes section. So that way, if you're answering a question and you need to refer back to your notes, you can either take a pause, and I would let them know if you're going to look down at all during your interview to look at your notes, I would verbalize that. I'd be like, that's an excellent question. I've prepared, some things that I want to share with you. I'm just going to take a moment to look at my notes really quick, and then look down and then look up, because you don't want someone thinking, that you're looking at your phone, or that like you have a text coming through and you're like texting while you're, kind of talking or being distracted. So I just say, I just want to check my notes before I fully answer you because I really appreciate that you've asked that question. And then take a moment, take all the time you need to look down at your notes, collect yourself, and then look back up, answer the question. The other thing you can do is position, Word document also on your screen or on top of the keyboard. So if you become a real, interviewing Zoom professional, sometimes they can't tell if you're looking in the camera or at your Word document that has your answers out there for you. But this does afford you the chance to kind of have your notes spread out probably a little bit more than if you were in an interview room.
Excellent. Excellent tips. Excellent advice. I've got 24 minutes after the hour, and one of the things we're going to do in a little bit is do an actual interview. Not with any of you. We have two people that are going to do it. And then Bethany is going to provide them feedback. So that's coming soon. Before we get to that, what I'd like to do is open it up to questions that you might have for Bethany. What is that question that you've always wondered about when thinking about going into an interview? And then I've got one final question if we have time. If we don't, no problem. But I want to make sure that as you think about interview experiences you've had or going into interviews, that you have a chance to ask Bethany your question. So either unmute yourself or put one in the chat box, whatever you're most comfortable with, and we'll keep the ball rolling. So a question that just popped up in the chat feature from Cameron is, how do you answer the question, are you looking at other companies?
Great question. Thank you, Cameron. Yeah, I think it's fair to say yes, but I think we have to be careful on how we answer that question, because when you're with that interviewer, you're really going to be sharing with them, how excited and enthusiastic you are about their company. You're going to want to be respectful and gracious about having time with them to talk about yourself for that position. So sometimes this question comes up. Kind of towards the end of your interview, and they might be starting to position you for an offer, and they're trying to figure out, do they have competition? Are you accepting other offers? Where are you in other processes? When I, really had a strong kind of recruiter hat on in my career, I would get ahead of it in the beginning as the recruiter. I would always ask from the beginning of, where are you at with other processes? Because you don't have to be afraid that you are looking at other positions. Of course you are. You have skills, you have talent, you have a great education. You want to be an employee at a wonderful company contributing. So that's not something to be ashamed of or feel bad about. If a recruiter was making you feel bad about that, I would think a little bit about, what they were trying to say to you if they were, because it's completely fair that you're interviewing at other places. I wouldn't pretend like you weren't, but I wouldn't. I guess be more flippant about them. So when you're with them, and I got asked, are you interviewing with other companies? I would say, oh, Bethany, thank you for asking me, that question. Yes, this is going to be my first position, after college. And so, I've cast my net pretty wide in terms of positions that I'm interested in being in. I'm at different stages in all of those interviews. I have to tell you, after looking at your company and spending time with you today, I'm really interested in this opportunity. This is a position that I'm really interested in, and I think I could contribute a lot because of everything that we've talked about today. But of course, just as I'm sure, you're interviewing other candidates, I'm looking at other opportunities. This is one that I would be really interested in getting an offer for, and I'll be upfront with you if I'm getting to that phase with other companies. As a recruiter, it's in their best interest to know that, because as a recruiter, they're the ones going back and forth between the hiring manager and their supervisor, getting the offer approved, negotiating start date. So it's in their own interest to be a successful recruiter, to be on top of that information, because the last thing as a recruiter, you want to be surprised at the end and be like, oh my gosh, Bethany's got 4 offers. Like, what are we, you want to be first in with that offer. You're going to want to be positioning that candidate away. If you're a top candidate, they are then going to probably start either picking up the pace if you're farther along with other interviews, or asking you about timelines from a decision-making standpoint, because they don't want to come in after you've had an offer for 3 days and you have to give an answer by the end of the week, and they still have a final interview to schedule. So on the flip side, as a candidate, I would be open about that, to say, Bethany, I'm really interested in this job. I have been interviewing at other companies, and to be honest, their process has been moving faster. They didn't have as many interviews in their process, and they just gave me notification that they're preparing an offer for me. But I don't want to be in the position where I don't give you guys a chance, or I'm not able to complete the interview process if the company is equally interested in me. So being proactive and letting a recruiter know where you are, particularly if it's a favorite job. If it's not a favorite job, I wouldn't worry about it. But if it's like, this is a job I'd like to have, I would even communicate that to them to be like, to be honest, Bethany, this is my first choice position, but I'm a little bit farther along in some other interviews. And so I just wanted to put that on your radar because this is a company I'm really interested in.
Great advice. I've got one. We've got a lot of questions popping in, and we have a little bit of a time frame. So
Okay,
what
I'll
I'd
try
like
to.
to do is I'll ask one more question, the next one in the list, and then I'm going to save these other questions and send them to you,
Okay, great.
if you'd be willing to offer thoughts,
Absolutely.
or we'll figure out a way to address them. But the final question, and then after your answer to this question, we're going to segue to the mock interview phase or the interview phase of our program. So the question from Rachel is, how do we ask about the company's stance on diversity and inclusion?
It's a great question. So I would do a little bit of research on the company. I would check out their company website. I would check out any social media, that they have, whether it's a LinkedIn company page, Twitter account. Some companies will have an Instagram. I know our company is more active on LinkedIn and Twitter, with these types of updates. But you're going to tell a lot, about the company on where they stand with diversity and inclusion issues by looking at their social media. And you're going to be looking for those cues of, have they acknowledged, Black History Month? Have they acknowledged what their company is doing in response to George Floyd? Has their company started or has employee impact groups to talk about these issues internally with the company? Our company just hosted, healing conversations in conjunction with the National Day of Racial Healing. So, and those are all things that we communicate on our social media. So if you don't see anything on social media that can help you answer that question, I would maybe think of saying something like, you know, the workplace that I really look forward to being, involved in is a company and a workplace culture environment that values diversity, inclusion, and a sense of belonging. It's something that I'd like to really be a part of. And I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about your company in regards to either initiatives or programs, how you enhance or provide platforms for diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So you're not asking them to be defensive. You're just saying, this is important to me. And I'd like to know how your company either speaks to this, has initiatives, how this is woven into your company culture, because this is something I know that's going to be really important to me.
Excellent. Great insights. What I'd like to do next is a segue or move to the next part of our program. And what we're going to do is we're going to have two candidates, actually a candidate, pretend candidate actually, and an interviewer do a practice interview. And they're going to be asked, the candidate will be asked 3 questions for like a national grants director role. And after each question, Bethany's going to provide feedback like, boy, Matt, as a candidate, you really did this really well and this well, but you may want to work on X and Y, or so that's the plan going forward. So I'm going to turn it over to 2 additional experts, to Casey as well as Matt, and they're going to lead us in this process. And Bethany's going to provide feedback, and then at the end, we'll allow some time again for questions, both about this as well as any for Bethany in general. And we'll try to wrap up close to 11:50. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our interview experts.
Thank you, Dale, and thank you, Matt, for being here with me today. I'd love to start out this interview with you just telling me a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so that's always a fun question. I live in Holland with my family, so it would be an easy commute to your Grand Rapids office. My wife of 11 years, she actually works in Grand Rapids, so we could probably drop our 3 kids off and commute together. So that would be convenient. After graduating from Hope in 2006, I moved to Washington, D.C. for work. I worked at the White House for a few years and spent about 10 years living in D.C. and Baltimore, and worked in the government. I worked for a large nonprofit. I spent about 5 years as an executive recruiter in the private sector, and then returned to Hope College about 3 years ago, where I've been able to work really closely with students and business leaders and other community members. And I'm hoping that that experience can translate well into a role like this one.
I'm going to jump in, Dale. Okay, great. Loved the closing and the kind of timeline that Matt provided. And this might be, something cultural that you're going to have to assess with each company in terms of kind of sharing family details in the beginning. So I think in Western Michigan, maybe some companies that you might be interviewing with, that would be a perfect, kind of intro, and might be very family focused or just a part of the culture of the company. I think you want to be careful if you're, maybe at certain companies, kind of identifying areas of your life that might be viewed as more personal. It might be a corporate culture that it's like, hey, we don't really talk about that. Or maybe you're mentioning that you're married to a woman. Is that putting me in a place where I might need to share, my status of who my partner is, or things like that? So I think it's just culturally something to be aware of, and something within your own comfort of saying, at that point, my wife and I, or my partner and I, moved to, Washington, D.C., and we've done this and that. But the closing, super, super strong. I would all make a note of how Matt kind of tipped and pivoted to the future and why he wanted to be a part of the organization.
So just a question. At the beginning of Matt's interview, he took a long, big drink. I would, I would think, Matt, before the interview starts, maybe try that. You want to keep things going smoothly. I noticed a few ums and ahs. Fillers are pretty common. And so the benefit of practicing this process is you can work at maybe trying to eliminate some of those. But Matt, I think you have a bright future.
Thank you.
All right, we'll jump into the next question here. Matt, could you provide a specific example of how one of your weaknesses could impact your ability to be effective in this role?
Yeah, weaknesses. So this is another fun question. I'd say, well, a couple things that kind of stand out, and maybe they're tied together, would be the ability to delegate well, and then my own perfectionism is something I can struggle with at times. So sometimes that plays out in little things like shoveling my driveway. I'm the only one that can do it right. I'm the only one that eliminates all those annoying little tire ruts that we all see in other people's driveways, but not my own. But then sometimes that plays out at work and things like delegating certain tasks because I know I'm the one that will get them done fastest. So those are, I think, delegation and some perfectionism at heart. Those are some weaknesses that I have.
Great. My note would just be at the beginning, right? So, Matt, like all of us, probably has that, kind of initial phrase that we say while we're thinking. So, every time you can hear him say, "That's a fun question. That's okay. That's a great question." That's a tactic for giving yourself time to think, particularly if you're not prepared to answer the question. So, be really mindful of what your kind of go-to phrase is to say, "Oh, okay," and not be afraid of silence. So if you do need a moment to collect yourself, say, "Great, thank you." Okay, and then start your answer, and just be careful when you're saying, Well, that's another fun question. Someone could interpret that as being sarcastic or kind of belittling the question that's being asked. Kind of like, oh, you've sent me another little curveball, So I'd be careful of that. Don't be afraid of silence, and then be mindful of kind of what your typical personal reaction is when you hear a question.
Good insights. And I think that I would maybe caution against the perfectionism term because it tends to be a little overused, a little cliche. And when you give an example of improvement, try to give what are those specific action steps that you've taken to improve? What's been the result? Really being able to use examples clearly to show improvement. You're getting really good practice here. Casey is asking you some challenging questions, so you're going to do really well in your upcoming interviews.
All right, Matt, I have one last question for you. And I would love it if you could talk to me a little bit about why you're interested in the National Grants Director role.
Yeah, I think this one's easy for me. Because I have a passion for working with children, ensuring that they have opportunities to advance in education. I love working with nonprofit organizations that are rooted in the West Michigan area. I've been able to build some great relationships throughout my time at Hope College. And in the last few years under my leadership, I've been able to I'd say significantly increase exposure for our students in business to the business community through classes and student visits and career panel events. So yeah, that's probably the summary of why I'd be interested in this role.
Okay, great. Not too much on this one. Probably, the pause at the beginning was interesting. I know I just said, don't be afraid of the pause, but this one was maybe like longer than normal a little bit, which is okay if you need that. Again, I would look at these qualifiers on how you're viewing the questions of, because it almost seems like you're assessing the question to say, this is an easy one, or, you've sent me another fun one. I would just get in the practice of answering the question by doing kind of what I mentioned earlier, repeat it back. So I think I'm most qualified, thank you, Casey. I think I'm most qualified for this position because of blank, and you'll stop yourself from kind of it almost comes off like you're evaluating the question. This one's easy for me. You're setting yourself up, because if you don't answer it well, then they're like, the easy one, you thought this was easy, and you kind of bomb the question. So I would just get in the practice of repeating back the question in your answer, kind of like when we all had to write out questions in school.
Great input, great ideas. So I don't know if you noticed this, Matt, and I don't know if Casey, as the official interviewer, noticed it. I know Bethany noticed it, but I would focus on the webcam during your response. The webcam eye is really the eyes of the person, is Casey's eyes. And so if you're looking down, if you're looking around a lot, it can be distracting to the person speaking with you. And we know it's difficult in a virtual setting to maintain that eye contact, and the webcam eye doesn't look that attractive. It's not, it's just kind of that little glowing circle. But we really want to practice maintaining good eye contact there, in that engagement, because that says a lot about us. You want to be centered in the frame, which you are. And for virtual interviews, try to have a neutral background whenever possible. I think that's a good idea. And try to have the webcam eye laterally or horizontal with your own eyes, so that you're not looking down. A number of appointments I've had with students and alums, the webcam is way down, so they're looking way down at me. So try to have it horizontal, which you, I think, have right now, which is really good. And as Bethany shared before, I think just do a tech check, make sure everything is working smoothly. So what I'd like to do is now segue to questions that our audience may have for the role play that you just saw, and questions that you'd have for Casey, for Matt, for Bethany, about the role play, certain types of questions. And then with any time that might be left, I'm going to circle back to some of the earlier questions that were posed. So what questions do you have for our experts on the platform about the role play? And you can either unmute yourself and jump in or put them in the chat box. Well, everyone did such a great job that maybe all now your answers, all the questions you might have about interviews have been addressed. So not seeing any. If an idea pops, by all means, put it in. In the 6 minutes we have remaining. Oh, here's one. Great, Sabrina, thank you. This question is, what are some unique ways to answer the question, why do you want to work at this company? And so, Bethany, I'd like you to respond, and then Matt or Casey also jump in after we listen to Bethany.
Sounds good. Great question. Again, this goes back a little bit to researching the company. So you do want to know, why do you want the job? So that's another, reflection or conversation with yourself to really think through, yeah, it's maybe in the general direction of the career that I want, or it's a good stepping stone. What can you learn about the company online or through a network of people, any sort of research that you can understand, why do you want to work with the company? Maybe you really like what you've learned about the company culture. And I would use your answer in this question to demonstrate to the employer that you've done your homework. So you can do a 2-for-1 in this answer and impress them by saying, gosh, I really want to work for this company because, through my research, I've talked with some other people in my network that have worked with your company before. And what I understand of your company culture is that you really value X, Y, or Z. And just knowing my own personal values and how I plan to and would like to contribute to a company, it seems like a really good match for me. And I'd like to learn more about your company culture and what you do intentionally to create that. So I would do as much homework as you can. Actually, know your why. Know, why do you want the job? Is it because the position's interesting? It's a company that you think highly of and admire? Is the company led by a specific leader that you think is really really cool, really important? All of those things that you can say, gosh, I'm really interested in working for your company because I've researched your CEO and I understand that they did this, or I was really impressed by this article that they wrote. And a lot of those messages resonated with me and really leads me to believe that this is a company I'd like to work for.
Great. Any additions by our other experts?
I was just going to add, well, first of all, that's the answer to your question, Sabrina, is research. So there's not much I can add. The only other element I'd say is it's your chance to show. So there's different ways that you can be interested, or you might be interested for different reasons. Some companies are really well known for their products, the services that they offer, their impact in the community. For others, there is sort of a missional focus, or maybe it's a nonprofit organization that has a really obvious stated mission within the community or within the world that they're trying to serve. So that's where you can reflect your own values and that there's sort of a mission alignment or just a natural interest in whatever product or industry or service that they offer. The only other the little thing I wanted to add is that one element of interviewing that can be awkward is name dropping, because I think hiring managers and recruiters are always sensitive to my mother has worked here for 15 years, and that's really what prompted me to apply for the position. And it's almost like the interview's over because of the contact that you have. But when this question comes up, this is a chance for you to not name drop, but to subtly say, hey, I do know a lot about this company. Dow Chemical's a staple here in Michigan, and I've got a lot of family friends. In fact, an next door neighbor that has worked at the company for 20 years in product development. And so I kind of grew up hearing about this company and this industry, and that's given me some interest. So if you have a name that you want to drop and you're going to do it really tactfully, this might be an opportunity to do it.
Good advice. Okay. Let's end with the following question. And So, here's one. What if they ask a question you weren't expecting? Some questions take a couple minutes, like what I call a stumper question. You're asked a question that stumps you. In the 2 minutes we have remaining, what are the 2 or 3 concise points that you'd offer? Bethany, start with you, and then Casey or Matt, any ideas you'd have?
Stumper question. You're going to be best prepared by, doing everything that we've talked about, is by doing your homework and being as prepared as possible. I remember, Dale mentioned that I, previously worked for Walt Disney World. I worked through the Philadelphia program with Hope College to work for the Philadelphia Eagles in their HR department. And before both of those interviews, I wrote out all those questions and what my answers would be, so that no matter what kind of Disney was going to throw me during that, because one of their questions was, what's one of your favorite Disney movies? And that might not be a question that you're like, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? That you're kind of, you get these questions that sometimes catch you off guard. But if you're a little bit prepared, show a little bit of your personality, you'll be able to handle the question. I would just rely on that preparation that you put forward. Some companies will ask you more, like problem solving questions, you know what I mean? They'll say, okay, we're at this point where we're going to ask you, like you hear of like a Yahoo or a Google kind of throwing these like, how do 3 foxes cross the river? Like one of those questions. Again, if you're studying the company, you're probably going to know that question's coming to you. I have mixed opinions about the website Glassdoor, but there is a interview tab on each company on Glassdoor where people will share, was it a hard interview? Was it a medium interview? Take that all with a grain of salt that you read on that website, but they will maybe shine a light into some stumper questions that might come your way.
Yeah, great advice, great tips, reiterates the importance of research and doing good background work. I sometimes suggest that if you're asked that stumper question, first make sure you understand the question. Sometimes a question could be poorly phrased. Maybe the person doesn't really know what they're asking or want to know. And so make sure you clarify the question if needed. But if you perfectly understand the question and you have no idea what to say, you need time to figure it out. So one of the things I suggest is do a verbal stall. You're asked a question, you understand, yes, I understand it, but I have no idea what to say. So I say something like, HMMM is a good verbal way to convey you're puzzled, because you are. And so you say, that's a good question. I'm going to think about that. And then take a few seconds and have your best quick summary of what you've done, which should be your resume. Have a mental scan of that, scan down it, hopefully come up with an idea that's relevant to the question and answer it. So, and if you simply do all those things that Bethany's suggesting, I'm suggesting, that others may suggest, if you still are stumped, simply come back and say, I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for you right now. I apologize, and then forget it and don't worry about it. Focus on the next question. Matt or Casey, any other thoughts? You're good? Good. So we're going to continue going. Some of you may need to pop off because of class or commitments or other things, but I'd like to try to get one more question from our earlier session to Bethany. Bethany, I want to be sensitive also to your time, but what I'd like to do is ask a question from Evan. My apologies, Evan, which you talked about before. How would you contact or establish a relationship after the interview? For example, should you ask about when you can expect a response? So how would you recommend approaching that?
Great. Thanks, Evan. The dreaded when can I expect a response question is probably every recruiter's least favorite question, because sometimes they don't know. They've got to wrangle 3 or 4 people after that interview to debrief. So a couple things I would do off the top. I would send an email, a thank you email to everyone that you interviewed with, even if it was a brief time with the recruiter and whoever you emailed with. If you need the email, actual email addresses, I would use that main contact, whether it's the recruiter or the HR person, to ask and say, I would love to, thanks so much for scheduling this time. I really got a lot out of this conversation. It really enforced to me that I'm very interested in this role. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any more questions while we're in this process. And please let me know if there's anything I should expect in terms of next steps. But in the meantime, I'd really love to thank so-and-so and so-and-so for, Matt and Casey for their time today. Could you please provide me with their email addresses when convenient for you? And then you're going to, have a little bit of a volley back and forth. You're not putting the pressure on the recruiter to provide you with anything that's difficult to, or, an answer, or, call me in 2 weeks, kind of a message. So get the emails. I would absolutely say an email is just as fine as a handwritten note. To be honest, right now, a lot of people aren't going into their offices, and so they're not getting mail. Like I go in maybe once a week. It's been so cold, so it's probably been a couple weeks, and then I get kind of all the mail that I'm in, and so it could be delayed even longer after your interview. If you're sending in a handwritten card, it'll always be appreciated, but an email right now is just as good. So I would send those emails out, and then what I would do is go on LinkedIn. Everyone on this call is going to need, or to have a LinkedIn. Absolutely recommend one of those. After that email, I would go onto LinkedIn and request to connect with everyone that you spoke to. And on LinkedIn, you can usually add a little bit of a note. So I would just say, because they might not, maybe you look different than in your picture, or they might not be connecting the name. In that little note section, when you say that you want to connect, I would say, hello, Matt. It was great to interview, with you today, to be a part of your company. I'd like to connect with you on LinkedIn. And then boom, you've got that, you're getting in their face kind of again, in a non-pressure sense. All they have to do is click accept, and now you're connected, and then you can learn more about the people. So I would gain relationships by the follow-ups and through LinkedIn connections. And then I would give, I would always advocate for the recruiters, give them a little bit of leeway time before you're checking in with them, because while we are teleworking, they're working on probably a lot of other things right now. And so they're getting a lot more emails because they are teleworking. They're not just popping up from their desk and walking down the hall. So email traffic has gone up. If it's a good recruiter, they're going to let you already know what to expect. They're going to say, Matt, great, thanks so much. I'm going to be able to get back with you by the end of the week. Or they're going to already want a debrief conversation with you on how things went. So I would give them time, because like the most annoying thing ever for a recruiter is getting those little pings saying, anything yet? When can I expect? When would you like me to, there's a lot of very polite ways to ask, and we all know what they all are when we see them. But do your best to kind of use these creative tactics, or anything that you see in the news or on LinkedIn. Comment on the LinkedIn that this company is posting. Believe me, people see that. People see your likes, people see your comments. Or you can say, gosh, Bethany, thank you for interviewing. I just saw this update about your company on LinkedIn. I'm really excited to know, what you guys are doing in this space. And then don't say anything else. They'll say, great, thanks. And maybe it'll jog their memory, or they'll feel bad because they didn't get back to you in time. And they'll be like, oh, thank God, they gave me a little bit of grace here. And I can say, oh, Casey, so great to hear from you. I'm glad you've checked out our LinkedIn. I did get some feedback. I'll be able to call you tomorrow. It'll just keep you in their inbox, but not in a nagging way as much as possible.
Great advice. Great advice. And thanks for letting us know that there are questions that really are challenging people in your roles, not just the other way around. I've got just a couple minutes before noon. I want to be sensitive to people that might have to go on, and to all of our great panelists today that have been participating. So thank you, Casey and Matt, for a great practice interview. We really gained from it. And a big thank you to Bethany for joining us all the way from Chicago. Your answers to our Q&A session were great. Feedback on the mock was great. And we just appreciate all you do to support our students in Hope College.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been so fun to be with you all, and happy to answer any questions that we didn't get through in the chat later.
Great, great. Well, thanks again, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and stay safe and stay warm.
See you.
Bye-bye.